Good afternoon. How many of you have people in your life who are not giving you what you need? No, that wasn't a joke. How many of you have people in your life who are not giving you what you need? Raise your hand. Okay. So what do you do when your needs are not being met? Hmm. Patience. How many of you need a sense of worth? Sense of worth. How many of you need to be told every now and then how much you appreciate it? Every now and then. What about do you ever need to feel that you are important? Do you ever need to feel that you are important? Do you ever need to feel that you are important? Okay. Okay. How many of you are familiar with the show The Voice? Are you familiar with the show The Voice? Raise your hand if you're familiar with the show The Voice. Okay. 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 It's a kind of a singing competition show. What you thought I said? The horse? The Voice, Mary Helen. Sure. I had to pick on Mary Helen all the time. It's The Voice, okay? So it's a singing competition show. And the judges, they sit in these large red chairs. It's typically four of them. Their backs are against the person who's singing. They've never seen the person. All they're doing is hearing the person's voice. And based upon what they hear, they'll hit a button. If they like it, they hit a button, and in hitting the button, then the chair spins around. Okay? And the person who has um, been selected by virtue of the chair turning around, those professional artists commit to coaching them through the remainder of the competition. But there are some episodes when a person is singing and no one hits the button. No one chooses them. No one wants them. And so the person goes home. I asked those questions initially because we all need somebody to hit the button, don't we? Try as we might, some of us try to act like we're hard, you know, we're about that thug life. We rough, but God has intentionally created us with an innate need and desire for others. We all need some type of confirmation and even affirmation. We all need it. Some differently, some more often, but every human being that has been created in the image and likeness of God has within them a desire for the other. We need that. But then there are times when we don't get it. Times we don't get it. And that kind of gives birth to insecurities. In your handout, that first line, it's talking about who's in the chair. And sometimes it's a parent who, if they are no longer with us, who perhaps they didn't say what we needed to hear. And we didn't get the type of affirmation and confirmation that we needed. Or it could have been they said something we wish they hadn't. And we didn't get it from them, the type of affirmation and confirmation that we needed as children. You know, we don't come here with excellent parenting skills, do we? No, we don't. And some stuff is passed on from one generation to the next. Some of us got cussed out because our parents got cussed out. Now that's real. And you know, we didn't question the love, but we sure wish that they didn't cuss us out. It just okay. So, could have been a parent sitting in that chair, and they didn't hit the button. Okay. Could be peers sitting in the chair. For some of us, we wish people would take our level of professionalism seriously. You know, sometimes you have coworkers who think that they're the only ones, you know, who know how to do their jobs. They're the Mr. Know-it-alls and all of that. They have all the answers. You know, they have the skill set. And sometimes, you know, we haven't gotten affirmed on our jobs, our professions, our careers. We haven't gotten the affirmation. We have not been treated as equal employees. We just wish the boss would say something good about us one time, acknowledge us one time in a staff meeting. Don't get it. Sometimes as students, you know, it happens even as students. I talk to young people, and that's a part of, you know, sometimes their struggles. Nobody comes around them. Nobody wants to hang out with them. They don't get chosen. And they just wish somebody want to be around them. So maybe it's somebody else I hadn't called that's in the chair, and they hadn't hit the button. Sometimes it's spouses. Spouses don't always hit the button. Sometimes you don't get what you need from the person you wish you could. And sometimes you appreciate it and value everywhere but home. Sometimes as parents, other kids wish we were their parents. So my kids don't ever say thank you. Hadn't given us the Father of the Year award yet. Okay. So to some degree, we all have insecurities. Insecurities. Okay? And some of us just learn to live with them. But what is interesting that at the end of the day, there's only one chair that matters. And that chair has already been turned around. And that's God. Amen. When we understand that He created us in His image and in His likeness. And we've been talking about, and we'll continue to talk about, hearing God's voice above all others. Now, one of the reasons why you and I sometimes need so much from so many others is because their voices are louder than His voice. On top of that, the father of lies lies to us, and we believe it. And so God, this is what we're going to look at this session, what God says, I am. And once we have heard and we continue to hear what God has said and what God is saying, we have a way of silencing the voice of the enemy. And sometimes the voice of the enemy is ours. You and I can say things to ourselves. Okay? We end up speaking against ourselves. Okay? Then we have low expectations of ourselves. Okay? We really don't think too highly of ourselves. We say things like, well, I really never wasn't that smart in the first place. You know, we say those things about ourselves. Okay? And so it is that voice that you and I want to be able to discern. What is it that God has said about me? God says I am, therefore, it's not what I say that I am that matters, but it is what He says I am that matters. And so then I need to learn how to listen to what He says I am, who He says I am. Okay? So what is a definition of an insecurity, or what are insecurities? How would we define that word, insecurity? A lack of confidence, maybe. Okay. You can put those up, Mo. What else? What else? Say again. What'd you say? Oh, okay. Let me hear your responses. Okay. Insecurity is less than, or a feeling. Is that what you're saying, Deb? A feeling. Inadequacy, okay. What'd you say? Okay. Not believing in oneself. That's lack of confidence, okay. Anything else? Huh? Not good enough. Okay, can be doubt, form of doubt. Okay. Anything else? Insecurities and insecurity. Okay, it can manifest itself that way. It can overwhelm us. Okay? Okay. We don't trust anyone. Okay? Fears. Okay. Okay. Stephen Furtick says, he mentions it's possibly an insult to God. Possibly an insult. Put that statement up, Mo. When insecurities override God's purpose in our lives, we're implying he didn't quite get the job done when he put us together. You got to remember, insecurities. Okay? There is this need to be affirmed, this need to be confirmed as valuable, as significant, as important, and on and on and on. Okay? And what happens to us is that we look for those things from other places and even from other people instead of looking to God. Okay. Have you ever struggled with insecurities? Anyone? Did you look to God for the answer? Isn't that interesting? That he has the answer and we look sometimes everywhere else but to the one who made us. Okay? So it is the accusation. It is to accuse God, okay, in some way not making us whole. And so therefore, we go through life kind of incomplete, longing and needing so much from other people instead of understanding that in Christ, what we have, and therefore God uses other people, but you got to understand, we're not looking to the people, but we're looking to the hand that's using the people. Anytime you and I look other places and to other people more than we look to God, we've gotten it backwards. Okay. Sometimes we need people more than we need God. And people will always let you down because people are imperfect. It's just what we are, just who we are. Okay. So let's look at Jeremiah. I think that's next on our handout. Okay. Look at Jeremiah. Okay. Go ahead and put those bullets up, Mo, just to give you the context of Jeremiah's ministry. Jeremiah perhaps had the worst ministry according to the world, and even probably to the church, of all the prophets. What do we call Jeremiah? The weeping prophet. Okay? Jeremiah's preaching was rejected. He was rejected. Oftentimes he was placed in isolation. He was heavily persecuted. Resistance like no other. That was basically his ministry. That was his ministry. Okay. But I want us to listen to what God said to Jeremiah and when he said it to Jeremiah. Okay, go ahead and put that first verse up, Mo. Okay. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, okay, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Now, how could it be that before Jeremiah experienced persecution, rejection, isolation, and so on and so forth, God said, you were successful? If you look at his ministry through human lenses, he was unsuccessful. And one of the reasons why Jeremiah would often experience depression was because of what he was looking at and how he was feeling about what he was doing. But God said to Jeremiah before he preached one sermon, I've already consecrated you to be a preacher. Before Jeremiah had messed up, God said, I chose you. Before Jeremiah could do anything to meet God's approval, God said, I approve of you. See, listening to God empowers us to be what God has already declared we are. It is not becoming, but it is the awareness of what God says we already are. Now think about this. I am not trying to get God's approval because I already have it. I can, however, get caught up in trying to get your approval. I mean, when Facebook first came out, I used to put my little sermon excerpts up there, like Saturday around 5 o'clock. It was just a little teaser, you know. And nobody would hit the like button. I know I'm a good preacher. I've been to school and stuff. Got a degree. But no one would hit the like button. No, you know what I mean. That I appreciate you trying. Yeah. Now some of you others, you put your little quotes up. And how do you feel when don't nobody respond to it? And then they put some trash up there. And they got like 700. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But Jeremiah was not trying to get God's approval. God had already given it to him before. See, before God calls you to be a parent, before he calls you to be in ministry, he's already approved of you. So before you do your first thing, you got to know that you are not auditioning for his approval. He's already hit the button. And I think, and sometimes we just don't get that because we get caught up in the likes and the expressions and all those other things from other people because we need that. But we cannot become overwhelmed And we cannot be so hungry and so thirsty for it that we don't even recognize that at the end of the day, the one that really matters has already hit the button. God approves of us. And Jeremiah gets this word before. Before now. Okay. So we ask the question, how in the world can you be approved by God and yet no rejection, persecution, isolation, and resistance? How is it? And God has already said, I've already declared you before the nations. What God is saying is this: people will reject you, but I won't. People don't want to hear from you, but I do. And so that's why you and I got to understand that this work that God calls us to, He has already approved us. And so when people start rejecting us, you got to know that's not God. And if we caught up in trying to please, you caught up in pleasing the people. Okay. But God has already approved of us. That's what He's saying to Jeremiah. And notice again who it is approved of Jeremiah, but then when it is done, it is before. See that frees us from trying to make God happy. Trying to be in good with God. Trying not to disappoint God. How can you disappoint one who knows everything? You can't. I guarantee you that if we recognize His truth will override all other comments. Okay. And God even has a way of occasionally speaking through one of His servants, because He knows we need the human voice. But we cannot caught up in a craving, a hunger, and a thirst for the human voice more than the divine. Because we'll always be looking for affirmation from people. Yeah. Okay. So this next section, Mo, okay, is before and after, and I've said a little bit about this. Go ahead and put that up, Mo, the before and after piece. Okay. Now we read that passage again. God's choice was before. Okay. Now what does this mean? What does this mean? God's choice was before. Okay. Before anything. Before anything. Before He had, and I've said this to some degree, before He had done anything, good and bad, God had approved of him. Okay. Those of us who've had the blessed the blessed privilege of being parents. Think about our children. They have us from day one. We love them. They do different things along the way. Okay. But nothing can stop the fact that they are ours. Nothing. They are ours, right? And so what happens sometimes if we grow up or our children grow up not believing that we're proud of them, what can happen? What can happen? what can happen if they don't get that affirmation and that confirmation? Say again? They can be discouraged, look for it somewhere else, self-doubt, bitterness, resentment, never measured up. And then what can happen if they have a sibling that gets it all the time? Jealousy. It happens. And then sometimes later in life, you say, I just want to ask you something. Why did you never told me you were proud of me? Why? But I heard you tell such and such all the time. And then sometimes they'll come back with, oh, you know I was proud of you. No, I didn't. I didn't, because I never heard it. And that stuff can eat away at us, can't it? Which is the other reason why we really need to know what God has to say first and foremost. And God's voice has to be large in our lives. It has to be. So before Jeremiah could do anything, this is what God says to him. It's before. You have been affirmed. You have been approved. I accept you. You are mine. All of that. Now Jeremiah has heard that at the beginning. Now, what happens when Jeremiah experiences his first dose of rejection? He's got to fall back on what God said to him from the beginning. And since God said this beforehand, Jeremiah has been reminded, the people may reject you, but at the end of the day, the only one you need to really be concerned about is God. God. Okay. So now that's not only that not only works as relates to doing good stuff. That I got to do all this good stuff to make God proud of me. No. Our proficiency nor our deficiency, can change God. Now, it's a different mindset when we understand that we don't get, and I'm getting ahead of myself, we don't stop trying, okay? We stop trying out. The audition is over. We're not auditioning to be approved by God and all of that. Our heart's desire is to hear him say, well done. Is to experience his glory upon our lives and in our lives and from our lives. We never stop that. But it's not to the point where we are not trying to do all this stuff so we'll get that. No, that is not the case. It is there. Okay? So it's before. And number two, God's acceptance was before, God's knowledge was before. When God says, I knew you, that is to say, God is saying, that is to say, every detail about you, I was aware of. That's what we mean when we say he knows he knows us better than we know ourselves. Okay. Flaws and alls. Okay. So that when Jeremiah failed, it wasn't a surprise to God. So if what God knew about Jeremiah didn't stop him from calling him, you know what that means? That there is nothing I can do, or there's nothing that I can do to make this ministry work, or there's nothing that I can do to stop the ministry from working. Now, I can fail. I can disobey. I can do that. Okay. I am not a robot. But ultimately, what I am not trying to get is God's approval. He accepts us. He approves of us. Our value, our worth, our significance, it all comes in God. Okay? How much time we got? 5 more minutes. That middle statement there, Mo. Okay? This is what I was trying to say. We don't have anything to live up to. Rather, we live out of an awareness of God's choice, God's acceptance, God's knowledge. Okay? We all have a last name, right? No, once you really know who you are, you're not trying to live up to it. Since you know who you are, you're living from that. Your parents already approve of you. Right? And as a result of that, you understand now, you know who you are, right? And whose you are. And so you are now aware of that. And so you are living from your identity. So you can't do what everybody else is doing it just because they're doing it. You are aware of who you are, right? Now that's different than living up to, right? And living it out. You're living it out. Okay? Because you're aware of it. You're not trying to get God's approval, though. You're not trying to get that. As a result of his choice, his knowledge, acceptance. Okay. The next section, let me see if we got time. Okay. Let's stop right there. Let's stop right there. We'll pick this up. But we won't meet next, yes we will, because it's Tuesday. We'll pick up the bottom half next Tuesday. Okay. Okay. Now questions on what I've said so far. And look at that action step at the very beginning of the handout. Mo, put the action step up. Yeah. To overpower what? The lies of what? Insecurity with what? With God's truth. That's the action step here. As we talk about, God says I am. That's what we're trying to get to. Okay. Okay. Now listen to me. Listen to me. Okay. Sometimes we believe what we say about ourselves more than what God says about us. And that's why we got to know what he says. Okay? And sometimes it's not only do we believe more what we say about ourselves, but even about what other people say about us. More than what God says about us. Okay? And so we got to get to his truth. Okay? We got to get to what he says. And then we begin, the application is we say what he says. I mean, we talk to ourselves anyway. Don't we? So just say what he says about us. Okay? Any questions about this top half? I want to do this in 2 parts. Okay? We good? All right, have a good rest of the day.